The first step is you want to confirm that the firearm is unloaded. Lock the bolt back and confirm that it's empty. The next step is you just disassemble the rifle the way you would to field strip it. So you want to take this disassembly pin and push it out to the left side, and then trigger housing unit, pull down and away. So this is your basic field stripping. Next, you're going to want to remove the pistol grip. So the Bullpup chassis kit comes with a 3mm hex wrench. You'll have to remove this screw and grip. The pistol grip should slide off to the rear. And depending on the brand of grip, it might be tight. But you're going to reuse the screw and the grip, so you want to make sure you keep those together. You want to make sure you remove the sights on the top rail and also any other accessories. So if you have any rail sections or accessories in these M-lock grooves, you want to take those off as well. But in this case, in the Magpul edition, these are just Magpul M-bus sights. And that's the last step in disassembling the receiver and barrel part is you want to remove the stock. So on all the Scorpion models, whether they have a stock or an M cap, you're going to want to hinge the stock. To remove the stock or end cap on any of the CZ Scorpion models, you want to just push this little detent in, and that should slide up and off. So now we have the barrel and bolt upper receiver. This is as far as it will have to be disassembled and put into the chassis. In the next step, we're going to want to remove the parts from this lower fire control housing to be reused in the Bullpup chassis. So first, we're going to remove the ejector here, and it has a spring underneath it that's captured. So you'll take the hex wrench that's supplied with the kit and remove that screw. And then holding pressure on the ejector, you want to ease that out. And there's the spring that's captured in there. So at this point, I would recommend having some Ziploc bags available to put these parts in. Next, we're going to want to remove the fire control group from this housing, and we do that. You make sure the safety selector is in the back or fire position, and then on the right side of the control here, there's a screw that goes in that we'll remove with the 1.5mm key that's supplied. So at this point, the right side of the selector lever can just be wiggled off, and the entire lever should then just pull out. And this will not be used in the conversion, so it can just be set aside. So the next step, we want to get this fire control group out of the trigger housing, and you do that by removing this bolt in the bottom, and there's a hole in the trigger guard there to help you do that. So your wrench will go in from here. So once that bolt is loose, your trigger group come out. Now the pins in the trigger group are not captured once they're out of the housing, so I would recommend maybe just putting a little piece of tape over those. Next, we want to get this disassembly pin out and remove the bolt release. So to do that, we're going to take a punch and push down here on the front of the disassembly of the bolt release. And once again, there's a spring underneath the bolt release, so you want to make sure you don't lose that. So to remove this bolt catch, it's going to have to be sprung up and out to clear this mount where the ejector goes. And, so I actually use this little area in behind here to leverage it up and push it back. And you're going to want to pull your spring out as well and make sure you don't lose those. And the last part we need to strip off this lower trigger housing is the magazine release. And this also has a spring on this front leg here that we want to take care that we don't lose. That's held in place by this roll pin. So it's a 5/32 roll pin punch. Now you're going to want to hold tension on that magazine release to make sure you don't lose your spring. And now your lower housing is stripped of its parts. So next we're going to want to remove the trigger from the trigger pack, and that's held in place by a roll pin right there. You're going to want to keep your trigger to reuse later. And now we want to go and add the trigger shoe from the conversion. So this is the trigger shoe, and you want this angled surface to be pointing towards the front of the firearm. So here's your hammer. I'm going to slide this on here. And then secure it with that same roll pin that we just removed from the trigger. So it will probably work best to get this roll pin started in the trigger shoe first. And at this step you can verify that the trigger is still functioning. Now we're ready to start assembling parts onto the Scorpion Bullpup lower chassis. And we're going to start with the magazine release. And CZ recommends that you use their magazine release. So if you have, an aftermarket part or even the factory part, this is the mag pull, you want to make sure you actually use the one that comes with the kit. As you can see, there's a little bit different profile in the release part there. So use the mag catch that came with the kit, but you are going to reuse your spring. So place your spring in there. So I've got the magazine catch and spring in this housing. I've got my roll pin started. At this point you're going to want to check your magazine. Now we're ready to put the bolt release into the chassis. And once again your spring goes in the front portion like that. Again, this release has to pop out over the block for the ejector. So the way that CZ recommends to do this installation is to get it into this position here and then actually take the mount, pop it in place like that. Now we're ready to put our disassembly pin back in. And again, we'll take our punch and push the front part of that lever down. And I'm going to make sure it's captured. And again, we want to make sure that an empty magazine is going to actuate. The next piece that we're going to put in is the front hook that secures the upper to this chassis. It uses an M4 by 10mm round head screw. So the Bullpup conversion will replace your safety selector off the original Scorpion carbine with a push bolt. safety. So to install that safety, we're going to want to put the spring in this hole right here. And then it comes with a detent. We want to make sure the pointy end of that detent is up. Place that in the hole as well. So you want to insert the safety and angle it up a little bit. When you get to the other side, just push it down and it will snap in place there. And you want to make sure that it clicks from side to side. Next, we're going to want to install the original trigger on the mount supplied with the kit. And when you do that, you want to make sure that this semicircular cut is facing forward so it goes together like that. And then there's a roll pin supplied with the kit to hold that in place. Next, we're going to want to install the trigger and mount on the trigger bar, and we do that with these round head M3 by 6 screws. So you want to orientate the trigger bar where this hook is down the back. And CZ recommends that for now you leave those loose for fitting purposes. We're now ready to put the trigger and the trigger bar into the housing. So this will drop in like so. Make sure that it's not binding. It will slide back and forth. Next, we're going to install these trigger bar hats to hold the trigger bar down in place. And you do that with these 4 M3 by 10 millimeter round head screws. So these go in place here. So once we have the trigger bar hats in, we want to again ensure that this trigger bar is moving freely. And once we know it's moving freely, we'll go back and tighten the trigger mount screws in the front. Now that we have this assembled, we just want to do a function check, and by that we want to put the safety in, on, make sure that locks the trigger, take the safety off, and confirm that that trigger bar moves freely. Next, we want to place the retainer bar in the chassis, and what that bar does is fills the space here above the transfer bar so the trigger pack fits in tightly. And that's held in place by 2 3 by 6 millimeter round head screws. Next, we're going to place the trigger pack into the chassis. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to make sure that this pin there will catch the groove in the trigger bar down here. So first, we want to set the safety to safe to hold the trigger bar in place. Now we're going to take this trigger pack, remove my tape from it, push this down in the chassis as far as it will go. Take it off safe so that can center itself. We want to put the retaining screw in, and that screw is an M4 by 10 socket head, and it will go in through the bottom of the chassis here like this. Alright, at this point we want to function test the fire control group and make sure we have everything installed right. So with the safety engaged, pull the trigger, there's no movement, it won't fire. The safety disengaged, I'm going to hold my finger in front of the hammer so it doesn't snap. Pull the trigger, hold the trigger, make sure the hammer resets. So with the fire control group installed, we want to put our ejector back in. Again, make sure the spring is in place and stays captured here. Now we're ready to put the pistol grip back onto the chassis, and at this juncture we realize that the MOE grip that came with our Magpul Edition carbine does not fit onto this chassis. As you can see, the undercut back here and this little tang on the front makes the shape a little bit different than the original grip. So we're going to go with an original CZ Scorpion grip to put on. And when Manticore designed this, they try to make it interchangeable with a lot of the aftermarket grips and triggers and things like that. So most of those should fit onto the CZ chassis, but you just want to make sure before you do that that your aftermarket part will fit on this. So this should just slide on straightforward, and it might be tight, so you may have to take a rubber mallet. And then you want to put your grip screw in to secure that. So now our lower bullpup housing is completely assembled, and we're ready to assemble our upper receiver and barrel. To do that, you want to make sure that you have the bolt locked back on your upper, as you always do when you assemble and disassemble the Scorpion. And then you want to have your disassembly pin all the way in the out position on the lower. Now, the front hook on the lower bullpup chassis will fit into this third slot here. So, and the whole assembly will hinge up into place. Disassembly pin will push down like that. To put the butt plate assembly on, first we're going to want to add the quick detach sling swivel pockets into the butt plate assembly, and we use an M4 20mm long round head screw with a 2.5mm hex wrench, and both of these pockets are threaded, so you're going to want to start by threading this in fully to one. And then you're going to want to slip these pockets into the butt assembly. And the tension on these QD swivel pockets is what controls how tight the butt assembly fits onto the receiver. So for right now, I'm just making those snug, and then after we get this assembly on, I'll go back and tighten them again. And once again, this butt plate assembly will be held in place by this spring-loaded detent on the rear of the receiver. So we're going to take, you're going to make sure the grooves in this butt plate assembly go into these receiver grooves. Just press that detent down, slide this into place. Now that's locked into place. And again, once your bullpup is assembled, and you want to just take it apart for cleaning, you'll do these last two steps in reverse. So if you have a long tool to push through the hole here in the back of the butt assembly to depress that spring detent, slide your butt plate assembly down, push your disassembly pin down, and the lower will come unhinged from the upper, and then you can just pull your bolt out assembly out like you do for normal cleaning on a CZ Scorpion. Next, we're going to put the cheek piece and deflector onto this rear part of the receiver, and CZ stresses that you have to have the cheek piece and deflector in place to safely shoot the firearm. So you want to make sure that you put this on and always have it on when you're firing it. And that's held in place by three M3 by 30mm long socket head screws, and you'll use the 2.5mm hex wrench to do that. And to start off, I'm just going to set these pieces together and start the screws in the assembly. And you're going to want to put this in the far back position, so as far back as it will go on the receiver. So the final step in assembling the Bullpup, we're going to want to put this Picatinny rail riser on the receiver, and this part is optional. With the original Scorpion design, with the drop in the stock, your sight's set lower, so when you go to the straight line design of the Bullpup, you might have to use a riser depending on what type of optics you use, but also your optic may already have a riser on them that works. But so that just slides on, and then it's held in place by two M4 by 30mm long round head screws, and you tighten those with your 2.5mm hex wrench. So now that we have the Bullpup assembled, I'm going to do some basic function checks to make sure everything's working properly before we take it to the range. And as always, you want to confirm that the firearm is unloaded when you do this. But I'm going to insert an empty magazine, make sure that latches in place, unlatches. It's working my bolt catch. And then now with the bolt forward and the firearm cocked, there's my fire position, my safe position. Just verifying that the gun will not fire with the safety on. Fires. Hold that trigger back. Cock the action. Listen for it to reset. Fire it again. So this completes our CZ Scorpion Bullpup build, and now we're ready to take this out to the range and try it out.